After a sermon is over, have you ever wanted to make a comment, ask a question, or listen to the preacher say more about a particular idea? If so, this podcast is for you. My name is Wes McAdams, and I'll be sitting down with one of my fellow McDermott Road ministers to discuss comments, questions, and thoughts that have come up after the sermon is over. Welcome to PS, the Post-Sermon Podcast.
Thank you so much for being with us on the PS podcast. We are so glad that you have joined us for another conversation about how we apply faith to our everyday lives. And we are talking this week about outreach, called to more outreach. Wes, you gave a great lesson on Sunday about this topic. Would you mind giving us a little recap of call to more outreach?
Yeah, thanks, brother. I will say at the top that I have some sort of allergies or cold or something, so if I get choked up during this podcast, that's probably why. But yeah, we talked about we're continuing this series on Called to More, the idea that our church family here at McDermott Road is doing so much good, including our outreach efforts, that we are doing so much good at reaching out to our community. But we believe that not only for our church, but for all congregations, for all of God's people, we are always being called to more, that there's always more for us to do, including there's more outreach for us to do. And so we looked at the church at Antioch, and that's sort of been a special story for our congregation throughout the years. Every time we're sort of at a pivotal moment, we've come back to Acts chapter 11, and we've talked about the church at Antioch. It's this beautiful picture of a diverse church family, a multi-ethnic church family that are reaching out to both Jewish people and Gentile people, to both to Jews and to Greeks, and teaching them the gospel. And a great number of people believe and come to the Lord. And so we really want to be a church like that. We want to be a church that is committed to disciple making, to reaching out to our community and making sure that everybody has the opportunity to hear about Jesus. And we are, I think, inspired by the church at Antioch. And I hope that we continue to carry on that legacy here.
When we look at so many of the different passages about early churches, you can get mixed feelings about what was going on there, but in reading this, you can't help but be inspired and be given a vision of what a church should look like. When we think about, reaching out to others, one of the things that you drew out was the fact that, at least initially, there was kind of a struggle in reaching out to those who didn't come from the same background, that didn't necessarily, maybe not a struggle in the sense of they didn't know how to do it, but it was just sometimes maybe easier to go to folks who operated, in this case, the Jews, from a similar set of language or assumption. What is it like to go outside of those assumptions and to speak with somebody who comes from a different background? What can we learn by doing that?
Yeah, there's so much that I love the word that you use, learn. Like, there's so much we can learn just by doing that, by having conversations with people. In fact, that was one of the comments that I got after last week's, or yesterday. It was not a week ago. It seems like a long time ago. Yesterday's lesson. There were people that came up to me afterwards, and they sort of added to what we were saying, that part of the way that we can all be involved in reaching and teaching more people is just by building relationships with people specifically that come from a different culture or different background. And there is so much that we can learn from them, that we don't always have to take the posture of a teacher. Sometimes we can take the posture of a student to say, hey, tell me about your religion. Somebody mentioned to me after the sermon that he has a lot of neighbors that are Islamic, and now is committed to not only studying the Bible with people that are sort of from a Christian background in his neighborhood, but also studying the Bible with people that are from an Islamic background. And one of the things he said yesterday was, maybe I could just ask them, like, you tell me about Islam and why are you a Muslim? And I would love to hear your perspective on Islam and why you follow Muhammad, why you listen to the teachings of Muhammad, and why you think I should listen to those teachings. And so he was excited about what he might learn from them. But that is a scary thing, because again, like you said, we don't always share the same assumptions. The Jews, the Jewish Christians that had been reaching out to other people from a Jewish background, they all shared a belief in the one God, in Yahweh. the promises that God made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the role that David plays, and the fulfilling of the promises made to David, and all of these things, they shared so much in common. Really, I think that the Jewish Christians really thought of themselves not as being a convert to a new religion known as Christianity, but they saw themselves as being the remnant who was carrying on the faith of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and David, that they were the true Israel, and they were continuing that on, but then reaching out to people that come from a very different background who didn't share those assumptions about the one God of Israel. They believed in a pantheon of gods. They believed in many gods. And we live in a culture, in a context where we have people in our neighborhoods. I specifically started yesterday by talking about our Hindu neighbors. They believe in countless gods. They believe in so many gods, and so we can't approach every neighbor as if we have the same assumptions, but we also can't refuse to approach a neighbor because we don't have the same assumptions, to say, oh, well, they wouldn't understand, or they wouldn't accept this, or I don't know how to talk to them. We have to find ways to talk to them. We have to find ways to build bridges and build relationships and learn how to communicate and say, okay, well, what are the assumptions that you make about God or deity or the divine? Like, what do you think about these things? And then learn, oh, well, that's similar to what we believe. That's going to require that we know very well and we're very well rooted in what we believe, but also that we are genuinely curious about what other people believe, and that we want to build relationships and explain to them, okay, well, you see how this is what you're saying, and here's what the gospel says about this. Have you ever considered that? And just start a dialogue with people. And yeah, it can be incredibly terrifying. It could be scary, but it's worth it.
I love that you use the word curiosity. I'm afraid that's a word even in our own, biblical studies. We've, tended to want to use the word certainty so
Yeah.
much and not to discount knowing that things are true, but sometimes we can view certainty and curiosity as being opposed to each other. But, true curiosity is seeking truth at a higher level and wanting to draw closer, and we can learn from others as well. So one of the things that comes out of interacting with others is it is potentially something that can invoke fear, but it's also something that can invoke faith or be an act of faith. You tied it to our yearly theme of fearless and faithful. How do you think that we can grow in faith through outreach?
Yeah, oh, that's so good. Well, I think understanding that it's the Lord who brings people to faith. Like, it's my parents, for instance, played a role in me becoming a Christian and me following Jesus. But I have to believe, if I believe the New Testament, that it's ultimately the Lord who gives the growth. It may be us who plants the seed or us who waters it, but it's God who gives the increase. It's God who gives the growth. And so we have to believe that God gets the credit for our faith and for the faith of other people. And so when we believe that if we just do what we're called to do, we share Jesus, we make Jesus known, that God is going to do what he promises to do. And there's a sense in which we can sort of not stand back as if we're passive in this process, that we are partnering with God, but we can watch God at work and be amazed by the things that he does. And so we just say, okay, this isn't me. And so if this works, if someone comes to faith, it wasn't me. It wasn't my genius strategy and how I'm going to reach people. It's not because I'm so articulate. It's not because I'm so talented or so gifted. It's God. God is the one who opens people's hearts. God is the one who helps that seed take root and produce fruit. It's God who does these things. And so it's exciting when we think about it that way. If I just think about me and my role and my responsibility and how hard it is for me, well, then, yeah, that's terrifying because I know how limited I am and I know how flawed I am. But when I can say, I'm just going to start planting seeds everywhere I go and I'm going to see what God does with them, when you start to see the fruit that God produces, you can stand back and say, wow, it's amazing what he did with that. I feel that way as a parent, even with my own boys. When I see the faith that God is producing in them, the fruit that God is producing in them, I think, well, yeah, I hope that I played a role in that. But man, God gets all the glory. And so it
Well,
increases my faith when I see the faith of others grow in response to what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to think about it. I've heard that the parable of the sower should maybe be called the parable of the indiscriminate farmer.
Love
Somebody
it.
who
Yeah.
recognizes that, hey, he's throwing, and God's going to be the one who provides the increase. When we think
And
about,
to that
go
point,
ahead.
sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt you, but to that
no, no,
point, I mean, he's a really bad farmer. Like, I mean, that's not a
yeah,
good way to do farming. It's not very strategic to say, I'm just going to throw it everywhere, including on the path. I mean, the seed is expensive. What are you doing, buddy? Don't throw it where the birds are going to eat it. Don't throw it where in the rocks. I mean, don't throw it over there. Don't you know there's weeds over there? And he's just throwing it everywhere. I love that idea of indiscriminately sharing the gospel. We're not prejudging to say, oh, well, these people won't accept it. Those people won't accept it. So I'm only going to throw seed on what I think or what I perceive as good soil. No, Jesus goes everywhere spreading the good news, and some accept it, some respond to it, and some don't. But that's not my business. My business is not trying to prejudge the soil. My business is just planting the seed.
well, that prejudge is good because when we are prejudging, in some ways, we're preempting God, right?
Yeah.
We're making the judgment for God about who is able to come to faith. You spent some time focusing on the descriptor, the hand of the Lord, was with them, and some really good questions around this idea of, do we believe that the hand of the Lord is with us, and are we asking the hand of the Lord to be with us? When you think about the concept of the hand of the Lord being with someone, how do you go about making sure we're just not affirming our own views about
Mm.
God or affirming our own vision for, his church or our own lives? How do we be good discerners in that conversation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it goes back to there's a word that when I was growing up, it had a certain connotation to it. And so I think sometimes we avoid using words like obedience or submission. And
Mm.
so, because again, I think that sometimes those words like obedience, sometimes they evoke this idea of following religious tradition that we've set up. And then we call that obedience to God. We're doing the will of God because we're following these rules that have been handed down to us. Whereas in the New Testament, there really is a place, a central place for the idea of obedience. And it's not about following religious tradition. It's about following the example of Jesus. That when we are living cruciform lives in every area, including this area of outreach, where we are putting others before ourselves, where we are having, Paul says in Philippians 2, having the mind of Christ, which means that we make ourselves a servant and we consider the needs of others and not just our own, that we consider others to be more significant than ourselves. And that's what we're doing when we're reaching out to our neighbors and sharing the gospel. We're not saying, I'm too busy to do that. That's too scary. I don't know what their response would be. We're saying, man, if they don't get the chance to hear about Jesus, they have no chance at eternal life. They have no chance to share in our inheritance. And if I don't share it with them, who's going to? And I need to put their needs above my own needs. I need to consider them more significant than myself. But how often do we, look at our neighbors? Yesterday we talked a lot about our immigrant neighbors that are coming to our neighborhood from different cultures and different nations, different ethnicities, different backgrounds. And sometimes people have this tendency to approach their neighbors from different backgrounds with a very nationalistic, very ethnocentric idea, which again, the first century church, they struggled with this too, to think, well, you don't do things the way I do things. You don't think of things the way I think of things. Your way of doing things is wrong. Rather than the mind of Christ that says, I'm going to consider you who is someone different than me, I'm going to consider your needs above my own. I'm going to consider you more significant than myself. And so I'm going to sacrifice my time, my energy, my money to help share the good news with you because it's not just about me. And so we really are following the example of the cross when we sacrifice, when we give up our own time, our own energy, our own money to reach our community with the good news. And so when we're doing that, when we're walking in the Spirit, when we're walking by the Spirit, then I believe that the hand of God is with us and that any success we see In doing those things, it's because we are obedient and submissive to the way of Christ, and God is giving success, and He is the one who is giving the increase because we are doing what we're commanded to do.
I think it's so good. And I mean, I'll be honest, I sometimes get very uncomfortable in outreach conversations because I don't do a lot of what would fall under, the conversation of outreach. I wish I did. I wish I was more proactive uh, with, my neighbors, and maybe that's a prayer I need to pray, to not only know that the hand of the Lord, will be with me, but to have the desire to be His vessel and to, reach out to those around me for sure. Another great phrase that you helped us look at was seeing the grace of God in others in the same way that we think about, the hand of the Lord. When we think about seeing the grace of God, different things can pop into our minds. What do you think uh, is really being put out there as seeing the grace of God in this
Right.
community, and how do we see the grace of God in others now too?
Yeah, I think it's another way of saying something like the fruit of the spirit. Like when you can see that salvation is changing people's lives, that the gift that God gives, the gift of forgiveness and the gift of reconciliation, the gift of the Holy Spirit is transforming people's lives. You can see love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. Specifically in Antioch, you could see people from different ethnic groups being reconciled to each other, being united to one another. And that is the grace of God at work. And I see that in our community. I see that in our church family. I see people from different backgrounds. I wish there were even more. I look at our neighborhood and I think how multinational, how multi-ethnic our neighborhood is. And I hope that someday our church reflects that even more because that is evidence that the grace of God is at work there. This is what Jesus prayed for. Jesus, when he was the night that he was betrayed, right before he was crucified, he prayed to the Lord that believers, not just the believers who were alive, but those who would believe because of their testimony, which would be us, would be one. And our oneness is a testimony to the idea that Jesus has come from the Father. He says, so that the world will know that you sent me. And so the best apologetic, the best defense, the best reason that we can give to people that God is at work in this church family, God is at work in the world, is the unity of the church, that the unity of the church transcends all of these worldly divisions, and that you can see things like bitterness and anger and resentment and racism and ethnocentrism and nationalism. You could see those walls being broken down and people coming together as one family. That's what you could see in Antioch, and I believe that's what you could see at McDermott Road. And you can look at that and say, I see the grace of God here. I see how His grace, how His gift is transforming people's lives. People are being changed to put others above themselves, to walk in the way of the cross.
And that kind of sets us up for our last topic of conversation with this idea that they were given a different name, right? They were
Mm.
given the name Christians, and it's a name that has significance, today. And we did get a few comments about that, but just for um, you know the sake of time, and I know you're powering through this, and I really appreciate it. But we'll just kind of wrap up with some thoughts on the name Christian. And I'll just tell you one thing I really appreciate that you do is my boys, my 7-year-old and my 3-year-old, already have a vocabulary of the phrase King Jesus, and that's a vocabulary that I didn't grow up with. We didn't call Jesus King, and we really didn't think about what the name Christ really meant. Definitely the old joke about, hey, it's just Jesus' last name. I mean, that wouldn't be completely fair. I grew up with a little more understanding of that, but it was not maybe to the same extent that it should have been. So when we think about
Mhm.
actually being called a Christian, what do you think that name should really entail, and how should we think about it today?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that idea that it came to the disciples. It was given to the disciples in Antioch. It probably was not something that they called themselves. In fact, it's a word that's only found 3 times in the New Testament. twice in the book of Acts and once in First Peter. And it seems to be a descriptor that other people were using about disciples, about followers of Jesus. They were calling them Christianos. They were calling them followers of the Christ. And so that was an idea that had meaning within the Jewish community, that they believed that there was going to be a Christ, a Messiah, God's anointed king. And so they were using sort of a political title to describe this group the same way they would have described a political party, to say, these are of the party of so-and-so, or these are of the party or the affiliation of such and such. And in their case, it was like these people, they're Jewish, they're Gentile, they come from different backgrounds, but the one thing they have in common is that they don't stop talking about how Jesus is the Christ, the King, the anointed one. And so that's the only thing they could think, I think, to call them was Christianos, that they are Christians, that they are of the party of Christ, that is their affiliation. And so, man, there's so much that we could apply and think about this. We could ask ourselves, like, is that what they would nickname us? Like, if people in our community looked at McDermott Road or looked at me personally or any one of us and said, what is it that makes this person unique or makes this group of people unique, and what affiliation are they a part of? Would they say, I mean, the one thing that they all do is they never stop talking about how Jesus is the king and how their loyalty and allegiance is to King Jesus? Or would they have a different kind of nickname for us today? And I think it's something that we all should think about.
No, I think that's so right. And hopefully we are folks that when people associate us with Christian, they are associating us with the way that we live and the way that we speak, and being aligned with Jesus the King. We got a new sermon series coming up this week. Do you mind previewing what's coming in March?
Yeah, so the next series we're just calling Vision, and we're talking about our mission, our vision as McDermott Road, specifically this congregation. What is our mission and our vision? What are we trying to accomplish? What is it that we do? Why do we do what we do? Not just what are we doing, but why are we doing it? We're right now, we're talking a lot about this Call to More initiative. We're trying to expand our church building, but really expanding our church building is just part of what we're trying to do, part of what we're trying to do. It's not the why behind what we're doing. The why is so much bigger than that. And we hope and believe that this building expansion is just a small part of accomplishing our mission. But we also think that that's true about everything that we do. Like, why do we sing? Why do we take communion? Why do we pray? Why do we do youth group activities? Why do we have children's Bible classes? Why do we have adult Bible classes? Hopefully all of these things serve our mission and serve the long-term vision. So we're going to talk about, what is that? Like, what is the mission of McDermott Road? I think should be the mission of every congregation. It should be the mission of every gathering of God's people. And then checking ourselves to say, does this really fit that? Or are we just doing these things because we've always done them? We do this and we do that, and we do this on Thursdays and we do this on Saturdays, and sometimes we do a little bit of this. Do these things serve the mission and the vision of the church, or are we just doing these things because we've always done them? We have to be really explicit and specific about what exactly are we trying to accomplish when we gather here, and what are we trying to accomplish when we go out into the world and live as Christians?
I'm really looking forward to that, and looking forward to thinking about the vision of our church and the way we can impact our community. So thank you so much, powering through the allergies and having this conversation with us. And I hope that if you live in Plano, you'll come join us this coming Sunday, and that you'll continue to journey with us on the PS podcast. Hope that you have a great week.
Thanks so much for listening to PS, the post-sermon podcast. To find out more about this podcast or about the Church of Christ on McDermott Road, you can visit our website at ccmcdermott.org/PS. If this has been an encouragement to you, we also hope you will rate and review the show wherever you're listening, as well as share it with a friend, because we believe sermons are not just for Sunday, but for our whole week and our whole life.